Hello again from Fox News in Washington. Well, there's no doubt about it. Rand Paul is on a roll. His 13-hour Senate filibuster on the president's drone policy has spurred new interest in who he is and what he stands for. So where does he see all this going? Senator Paul joins us now from Bowling Green, Kentucky. And Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Chris.
Ever since your filibuster earlier this month, your standing in the Republican Party has certainly shot up. As we mentioned, you won the CPAC straw poll. You made a major speech on immigration reform this week, and you're going to headline an Iowa State Republican dinner in May. What do you think? Why do you think that you are suddenly such a hot property in the Republican Party?
You know, I think people are hungry for someone who will stand up on principle. You know, standing up on the right to trial by jury is something that really a lot of people should agree with, you know, both on the right and the left. And even some on the left were disappointed in the president by not being firm and clear that everybody has the right to trial by jury, that we would never drone someone in America. But it was disappointing to many that he would not answer the question, and it was like pulling teeth. It took 13 hours of filibuster for him finally to say, no, we won't kill non-combatants in America. So I think it was well worth it, and it really served to narrow presidential power, which I think is important, that there are limits.
We're going to get to the substance of the filibuster a little bit later, but does all of this attention now, does it increase your interest in and your sense of the feasibility of running for president in 2016?
Well, you know, I've always said I wanted to be part of the national debate. I think the Republican Party needs to figure out how to be bigger. And I think I do bring some ideas to that. And so I've talked with the Republican National Committee, the Republican National Committee chairman, about things I think we need to do to be competitive on the West Coast, to be competitive in New England and Illinois. And I think some of those ideas are a more libertarian Republican approach to things. And I think that a lot of young people are attracted to that, and our party could grow if we accepted something maybe a little different than the cookie-cutter conservatives that we've put out in the past.
So to press my question, does this increase your interest in running for president? It sounds like the answer is yes.
Well, I'm definitely being part of the debate. I think the country is suffering right now with 12 million people out of work, so I want to be part of the answers to it. Whether or not that actually is me specifically running for president, I don't know that yet. But I do know that I think the country's suffering with significant unemployment, stagnation. There's still some question whether we're dipping into recession at this point. So we do need something new. The party needs something new to grow, and I want to be part of that.
I want to pick up on that because Republicans right now see you and Florida Senator Marco Rubio jockeying for position. At CPAC, you talked about your various ideas, and we're going to get into them in a moment, for how to grow the party. Senator Rubio also talked about it, and let's take a look at what he had to say.
We don't need a new idea. There is an idea. The idea is called America, and it still works.
Question, is that enough? America still works?
Well, I don't think we need new principles. I think the principles we have, we need to be more explicit with. And instead of, working around saying, oh, we want revenue neutral tax reform, I think we need to stand up and say we want to leave more money in the economy. We want to reduce taxes. That when Reagan did it, we had 7% growth in 1 year. That's the kind of, I think, bold leadership we need. But it's not a new principle. We don't have to reinvent ourselves in that way. But we do have to stand on principle. And unless you really stand for something, people aren't motivated to go out and vote for you.
Well, all right, let's talk about some things you stand about. Immigration, because you came out with your ideas for a comprehensive plan this week, and since then you're taking fire from both the right and the left. You called your plan for creating a legal status, not citizenship, but a legal status for the 11 million folks who are already here, illegal immigrants who are already here. But you're taking fire from the right because you oppose the E-Verify system, which would make it easier for employers to check whether their workers are in fact legal or illegal. Why would you oppose that?
Well, that's not the main part of my plan. The main part of my plan is trust but verify, that says we have to have border security. Conservatives have always wanted border security before we had immigration reform. The amendment that I will add to the bipartisan plan will ensure that there is border security and that Congress gets to vote on that border security every year in order for it to go forward. With regard to E-Verify, it's not that I'm opposed to some sort of database check. For example, when you come into the country, I think the country should do a background check on you to find out if you're a felon or if there's a problem. I also think that those who come in and get a work visa should be in a database, and that when someone applies for welfare, it should be mandatory that they look at that database to make sure you're not here on a work visa, which means you're not eligible to vote and you're not eligible to get welfare. So I'm not against any kind of checking. I just would prefer the government to be the policeman and not the businessman. It's kind of where it happens, whether it happens and the businessmen have a lot more expenses to do this, or whether the government should do it.
Yeah, let's talk about your idea, which is very important to you, that it should be Congress. According to the Gang of Eight plan, it would be governors and a commission. They would decide whether or not the border is secure. You want Congress to get into this. And there are some Republicans who say you're setting up the GOP for a fall because it'll be a vote in Congress. It'll be very political. A lot of Republicans will say, well, gee, we're not satisfied with border security, and that'll only increase their sense of separation from Hispanic voters.
I would argue the opposite. I would argue that you're only going to get the conservatives, particularly a Republican House, to pass immigration reform if we as conservatives are reassured that the border is controlled and that we get to vote on whether the border is controlled. We have not believed in the past that the promises came true. In 1986, when we normalized folks, they said, oh, you'll get border security, and a lot of us feel like it never happened. That has soured the debate for 20-some-odd years now. So the only way you get this forward, I think my Trust But Verify actually will bring the House along. No immigration reform is going to happen unless Republicans in the House sign on to it, and I don't think they'll sign on to it unless you get something like what I'm talking about. And it would include governors as well, would include Border Patrol, Investigator General, and it would have a matrix of things such as how many people are being captured, how many people with felons are being turned away, that kind of thing, and then Congress would vote on it. The main reason I don't want the president just to stamp it is I don't really trust any president, Republican or Democrat, to do a good enough job to say the border is really secure. Every representative should get to vote on that.
You are, as you mentioned, a libertarian conservative, and in your CPAC speech, you embrace some of those principles. Let's take a look.
Our party is encumbered by an inconsistent approach to freedom. The new GOP will need to embrace liberty in both the economic and the personal sphere.
Let's talk about the personal sphere, because you would like to relax some of the laws for people who possess and are smoking marijuana. And you also in the Senate have voted against, in fact, to ban, or rather against a ban on synthetic recreational drugs. Why are you more lenient on drug laws, sir?
The main thing I've said is not to legalize them, but not to incarcerate people for extended period of times. So I'm working with Senator Leahy. We have a bill on mandatory minimums. There are people in jail for 37, 50, 45 years for nonviolent crimes, and that's a huge mistake. Our prisons are full of nonviolent criminals. I don't want to encourage people to do it. I think even marijuana is a bad thing to do. I think it takes away your incentive to work and show up and do the things that you should be doing. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't want to promote that, but I also don't want to put people in jail who make a mistake. There are a lot of young people who do this, and then later on in their 20s, they grow up and get married and they quit doing things like this. I don't want to put them in jail and ruin their life. Look, the last two presidents could conceivably have been put in jail for their drug use. And I really think, look what would have happened. It would have ruined their lives. They got lucky, but a lot of poor kids, particularly in the inner city, don't get lucky. They don't have good attorneys, and they go to jail for these things, and I think it's a big mistake.
Actually, I think it would be the last three presidents, but who's counting? Let me ask you about a different issue.
There you go.
The Supreme, well, he didn't inhale. The Supreme Court will hear arguments on same-sex marriage this week. You say the federal government should stay out of this issue and leave it as it has traditionally been left to the states. Should the court therefore strike down the Defense of Marriage Act, which is one of the cases it's going to be hearing this week, which bans federal benefits for same-sex couples who are legally married in their state? Would you strike down that as federal interference in a state matter?
I think it's a really complicated issue. I've always said that the states have the right to decide. I do believe in traditional marriage. Kentucky's decided it, and I don't think the federal government should tell us otherwise. There are states that have decided in the opposite fashion, and I don't think the federal government should tell anybody or any state government how they should decide this. Marriage has been a state issue for hundreds and hundreds of years. DOMA's complicated, though, because DOMA does provide protection for the states from the federal government, but then you're right, part of it federalizes the issue. I think there's a chance the court could strike down the federalization part of it. If they do, I think the way to fix it is maybe to try to make all of our laws more neutral towards the issue. And I don't want the government promoting something I don't believe in, but I also don't mind if the government tries to be neutral on the issue. You know, the tax code, I'm for a flat income tax, and we wouldn't have marriage as part of the tax code. Health insurance, I think there's a way to write it where it would be neutral and you wouldn't bring marriage into the whole idea of health insurance.
I want to go back to your filibuster, in which you argued against the president's drone policy, especially with regard to targeting of American citizens on American soil. After you had filibustered for 13 hours, you got this letter from Attorney General Holder, in which he wrote, "Does the president have the authority to use a weaponized drone to kill an American not engaged in combat on American soil?" The answer to that is no. Senator Paul, after your filibuster, you said you were very happy with that letter. But in fact, doesn't it leave a huge loophole? Because it seems to me what Attorney General Holder is saying, just by implication, or is that the president does have the authority to use a drone strike on an American on U.S. soil who is involved in combat.
Well, and see, here's the thing is I've never argued against if people are attacking the Twin Towers with planes, an imminent threat or an active ongoing threat. I've never argued you wouldn't use drones or planes or F-16s to repel that kind of attack. The problem is that a lot of our drone attacks, our targeted killing overseas, are killing people not actively engaged in combat. And that's another debate, but that kind of standard can't be used here. If you're accused of being associated with terrorism, which could mean you're an Arab American and you've sent emails to a relative in the Middle East, you should get your day in court, and I think you should get a lawyer and a trial, and I think most Americans agree to that. Did the president completely slam the door on not using drones? No, I think there's some wiggle room in there, but we did force him to at least narrow what his power is, and that was my goal.
Senator Paul, as I was studying up for this interview and hearing you today, I'm having some difficulty figuring out exactly where you are on the political spectrum, because in some senses you're to the left of Barack Obama when it comes to drones. On the other hand, you're to the right of Congressman Paul Ryan, whose budget you opposed, voted against this weekend in the Senate, because you say that it doesn't cut the budget, balance the budget fast enough. Do you think there's room for a realistic, feasible presidential candidate who's to the left of Obama on some issues and to the right of Paul Ryan on other issues?
I think we have a confusing spectrum. This left-right spectrum doesn't always work for people. But I think because of some of that confusion, it shows that someone like myself, I think, could appeal to young people, independents, and moderates, because many of them do think it's a mistake to put people in jail for marijuana use and throw away the key. So I think there are people who would like a less aggressive foreign policy. There are all kinds of issues that don't neatly fit in the left-right paradigm that I think would help, because we're not doing very well in a lot of these states, these purple and blue states. So we do need a candidate that would appeal across the left-right paradigm. Just briefly, we got about 30 seconds left, though. I mean, your budget, which would balance the budget, your plan would balance the budget in 5 years. Paul Ryan's, which has come under attack for balancing it in 10 years. You've introduced it 3 consecutive years in the Senate. The most votes you ever got was this weekend when you got 18 of 100 senators. I mean, isn't that out of the mainstream? Well, the thing is I think the legislature is about 10 years behind the public. For example, I've introduced amendments to quit sending money to Egypt and build bridges here in the United States instead of in Egypt. I'll bet you 90% of the American people agree with me, but 80% of my senators disagree with me. So I would argue the Senate is not up to date with what the people really want. Senator Paul, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's always good to talk with you, sir. Thank you.